Hi, my name is Bobby Lopez, and I'm professor of instruction at Texas State University, and I'm honored and humbled to be able to bring to you the 2026 TMEA All-State Percussion Etudes. The one we're going to talk about first is going to be the snare drum etude. This etude I picked number 19 out of Mitchell Peters' Advanced Snare Drum Studies. A wonderful etude book, and I thought that this would be a great opportunity that would be able to display technique, musicality as well. So we're going to talk a lot about different elements that it takes to be able to perform this etude at a high level. One of the very first things that I want to talk about is equipment. What type of drum you're playing on, what type of sticks you're using, so on and so forth. So the sticks that I chose to use for this etude are the Innovative Percussion CL4L, Christopher Land's. I thought that this was really the perfect stick, and I used a lot of different sticks before I came to this conclusion. But the thing that I really love about this particular stick is the weight of the stick and the taper of the stick. I thought that was really important when it comes to playing some fast, very soft passages. I'm in this etude, and the taper of the stick really helps you when it comes to being able to control things at the pianissimo level. I like the weight of the stick because when you get to playing forte, having to produce big sounds rather, on the drum, the weight of the stick is really going to help you to be able to do that without having to really push the stick too much into the head. So that's why I really loved this stick, CL4L by Innovative Percussion. I think it's a great stick to use for this etude. Also, the bead for the tip is an acorn bead. And this is a great balance, I feel, between an articulate tip and something that's going to give you some body as well. So that's what I chose for this. Now let's talk a little bit about the drum that I chose. This is, of course, the Pearl Philharmonic 6.5-inch drum. Now, while I do own other drums, and I did try other drums when it came to this etude in particular, I went with this size drum because I really liked the sound that it gave me at the forte level. You can still get a nice big bodied sound when it comes to playing some of the forte passages in the etude, and it gives you a good tone. The other drum that I considered that I also own is another Pearl Philharmonic aluminum, which is what a lot of schools also have. That's a great drum for many purposes, but a lot of schools will utilize that drum in probably a 5-inch depth. And that's also a great drum. I preferred this one because of the warmth of the wood. Again, when you're playing these big forte passages, I felt like this was an appropriate drum. The head that I'm using on this is a Renaissance Diplomat head, which is a wonderful head because it gives you the warmth that you need, but it is also thin enough that when you're playing all the pianissimo passages, that it gives you a great snare sound still. And on the bottom, I'm using a Rebo Diplomat head. And so that's the equipment that I chose to use for this etude. Now I want to talk a little bit about dampening. Dampening your drum is an important part of how your sound is characterized. A lot of people will choose to dampen their drum a lot, and some people will choose to dampen their drum a little bit. I like both of those ideas. You need some dampening to be able to play your articulate passages, but when it comes to playing anything mezzo forte plus, we really want to get a good tone out of the drum. And if you over dampen your drum, sometimes you miss out on some of that tone. What I use is, this is a small piece of leather. It's large enough for me to be able to use this amount. This is kind of modeled after some of the freer dampeners. They're great dampeners, but I chose a little bit different material. It's not as heavy as a leather piece, but it does a great job. But what I also did with this is I kind of dialed it back a little bit. I didn't use the entire piece. So I folded it in a little bit this way. So you can see probably only covers about 3.5 inches or so of the head. The other thing that's important about dampening is particularly how and where you put your dampening agent on the drum. A lot of people like to use maybe like up to half of the drum when it comes to dampening, which is okay. Again, like I said, you really want to dry out your sound. You can dampen your drum to that extent. One of the things that is important when you're talking about dampening is you don't want too much weight on the head, because what's going to happen is you're going to make it difficult for the top head to be able to vibrate and resonate. If you don't put too much weight on it, like some people use a wallet sometimes, while that feels like it's a good dampening agent, sometimes it puts a little bit too much weight on the head. So talking about dampeners, I brought a few things that are good dampeners. One of the things that I think is probably very accessible to you might be something that you can find somewhere at home. This is sunglasses cleaning rag. Many of you may have something like this, but this is a nice light material. If you have something like this, you can set it to where it hangs just a few inches into the head. You can use little binder clips as well, just to hold that in place. And that's also a good dampening agent. Here's another piece of leather that I had. This was just another thing that I made myself. Again, it's kind of like a little bit like the freer dampeners, maybe not as heavy. This is the Black Swamp 30th anniversary dampener. And this has some weight to it, made of metal essentially. And you can set this as well. If you want even more dampening, you can take a cloth like we talked about before, set it over your drum, and then use something like this. You want to be careful that you don't want to use too much weight, in my opinion, because it'll stop your head from vibrating. Here's another external dampener. This is made by Yamaha, and this clips on to your rim. You can use this with a dampening cloth or just by itself. One of the things that I don't have that many of you may use at your school are moon gels. Those are also great. You can use moon gels to dampen. This is another dampener, and this is made by Majestic, I believe. This goes over that much material over your drum. And it's also kind of a lighter material. So while it covers more area in the head, it doesn't weigh it down very much. These are just a few of the dampeners that you can use. Like I said, I tried all of these with the Etude, and I went with this size piece of leather. When it came down to it, I folded it in this much, so it's really only covering about this much of the head. Okay, now I'd like to get into some of the music. You want to try to be able to find your forte sound as much as possible. And so in order to do that, we want to make sure that we're not overplaying our fortes. We want to try to use the weight of the stick to help us produce the sound. A lot of times I see some of the mistakes that young players make is that they play too into the head, squeezing the stick and pressing into the head or pushing into the head quite a bit. And what that will do is that will distort your sound. So you want to be careful not to distort your sound. You want to try to find where you can have a nice, strong, full sound and not overplay the drum. What I encourage you to do is turn your snares off, play maybe about a mezzo forte, getting to forte, maybe going to fortissimo, and trying to really listen for a good, full tone. Just the same way that you've tried to find your forte, your fortissimo sounds, you need to also try to find your pianissimo sounds. And how far can we go before we kind of start to lose a snare sound. Now, on a drum like this that has nice deep beds cut into the bottom bearing edge, and you have 3 different snares to help you achieve a good balance of snare sound, you can get pretty far far to the edge and still get a good snare sound. So you want to try to find that for yourself and see how far can I go. This is going to be my pianissimo sound, and this is going to be my fortissimo sound. And then try to lay your dynamics in between those two extremes of your dynamics. One of the techniques that we have here in the Etude is the 4-stroke rough. And people play them a lot of different ways. You can play those singled. The way I prefer to do those is starting with a left hand and then playing 2 right hands and then release with the left hand. Some people like to do that the other way around and play right, left, left, right. And so it's up to you what sticking you want to use. You may have even come up with a different sticking, but the important thing to remember is you want to be able to hear the articulation of the 3 grace notes followed by the primary note. And so that's a very tricky spot in the Etude. It's piano, but the rough has a little accent on it. So don't be afraid to think about it as piano, yes, but that 4-stroke rough has just an accent on it. So don't be afraid to play that out just a tiny bit. One of the ways that I like to practice it is to feel that 3. And that way you get an idea of where the 4-stroke rough is and then where my other notes are. So that's a good way to kind of think about it. It's a good way to practice it. Set it with a metronome, play that, and your hands will start to get used to what that feels like. And then you can plug it into the passage. Let's talk about rolls. When it comes to playing a good concert roll, I prefer for the roll to have a nice open quality. What I mean is I don't like to press too much into the head, because essentially what you will do is you will stop the head from vibrating. And that's not a very good sound when you're playing a roll. So what we want to try to do is just still maintain a nice open quality to your roll. So what I like to think about is whenever I practice my buzz rolls, I like to try to produce 3 strokes on each hand. And a nice little trick that I like to do is I'll check myself once in a while. I'll play a roll, something like that. But I'll record myself in slow motion on my phone, and then I'll go back and watch it, see how many strokes each hand is playing. So that's a good little check for yourself to see how many strokes you're actually playing in a buzz roll. I like 3. Now, let's talk about some of these Forte rolls. Some of the Forte rolls, you know, it's going to be very easy for you to hear an accent because, you know, you're trying to play a loud roll. And so sometimes the attack feels like it should be very strong. And what that will end up being is you'll end up accenting the beginning of the roll, even though on paper it shows that it should not be accented. A little trick that I like to use is the beginning of my roll, I'll play a certain height, but then the very next stroke will be a little bit higher, and that kind of hides your accent a little bit. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if you can practice that, you will be able to get an idea of what that sound is, and you'll be able to smooth out the attacks of your roll so they don't sound too accented. Another section I'd like to address are these rolls that have some separation. As we're playing, I like to think of those rolls as separated. So I'll play those right to left, trying to create longer buzzes. So in that case, my buzz will probably be more than 3 bounces. What I'm trying to do is elongate as much as I can from the right hand to the left hand. And still maintain separation between each one of those rolls. So that's kind of a tricky part. That's something that you'll have to kind of experiment with. And you can just think about elongating the right hand to the left hand. Try doing it backwards, left hand to right hand. So that's something, again, that's going to be a little bit tricky, but certainly that's something that I would definitely practice. And then we have some rolls that are accented after that, right? So those you definitely want to be able to put a point on those rolls. Okay. And then a very subito piano that happens right after that. You want to be careful that that last roll that you accented doesn't decrescendo into the next downbeat. Keep it nice and strong, and then subito piano to the downbeat. I hope that you found some of my comments helpful to you when it comes to Etude number 19. Certainly, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Some of you guys already have reached out to me with some questions, and I'm happy to answer them. I'm happy to give you any kind of help or insight that may help you on your journey. So I appreciate you watching this video, and of course, like I said before, I'm very thankful to be able to bring these etudes to you this year. Thank you.